Your father was in prison. You were in prison. You were in prison, and two brothers were in prison with you?
All of my brothers were in prison.
All of them? Simultaneously?
At one point, a number of my uncles, cousins, all of my brothers and my father were in prison. But that wasn't unusual. Sometimes when I say that, people think that was not unique. That happened. Every one of the 6 counties had multiple family members in prison, and sometimes even worse, had husband and wives in Armagh Women's Prison. This is internment now, and in Long Cash at the same time, and children being looked after by other family members. It's the housing estate that I grew up in. I don't remember the stats now, but there wouldn't have been a family that didn't have someone in prison.
Mm. Odd then that you didn't join the IRA.
No, not at all. And I know people just believe that I was.
Do you know something? Yes, they do.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I'm not. I don't lose sleep over this.
Right. But I was wondering about you, thinking about doing this interview. Do you ever say, I wish to the Lord that I had said at some stage, I was a member of the IRA, I was officer commanding in Belfast. That's it, out, done and dusted.
No, I'm not going to try and play fast and loose with people out there on this issue. I don't distance myself from the IRA. During the time when the
Well, say Brendan Hughes and Dolores Price, why would they lie?
Well, I mean, people make their own minds up on this issue. That's the point I'm making, Marian.
But why would they lie?
Well, both Brendan, who was a very, very dear friend of mine for a very, very long time, and Dolores, who I knew very well, they parted company. They were totally opposed to the peace process. They were opposed to what Sinn Féin was doing. They were opposed to the Good Friday agreement.
But why would they lie about the IRA, about you and the IRA? Presumably you all knew, as you say, in your neighbourhood who was and who wasn't in the IRA.
Well, my position is one which has been consistent from day one, and I restate it. But at the same time, I was one of the people who was the foremost defenders of the IRA, well, critical of many things that the IRA did in terms of the
it just puzzles me that if you never joined it and other people did and lost their lives and did dreadful things, that somehow or another they reward you by making you president of Sinn Féin. But I mean, Dolores Price has said it and it's on the record, and so did Brendan Hughes. But I mean, I know that I read somewhere that you said one of the saddest days of your life was the day of your mother's death. And she was a mother of 10 children. And Jean McConville was a mother of 10 children. And disappearing somebody just seems to be so low. And Dolores Price was very clear that you gave her instructions to drive her across the border.
Well, Dolores is wrong on that count. You're right that it was a dreadful thing to happen. It's one of those things that never should
Why do you think people don't believe you?
Well, that's a matter for people. I mean, the only time that I discuss this issue with anyone is when we do interviews like this.
Yeah.
People will decide.
Because it's like a sore. And I mean, even the Taoiseach in the Dáil and the various spokespeople for various things, it's just sitting on your shoulder.
But come here, Marian. The Taoiseach's making political points on this issue. Which is fair enough. I'm not complaining about that. That goes with the territory. People will have decided, yes, Gerry Adams was in the IRA, but he's not going to say it, and Sinead, and then they either accept that or they don't accept that, and they go on about their business. I have had a mandate for about 30 years or more, perhaps. I was very humbled and honoured to represent people in West Belfast. They had a choice. There were a whole plethora of candidates. All of these issues were rehearsed in the course of those election campaigns. I moved to Louth. People there did me the great honour of electing me to represent them. All of those issues were rehearsed in the course of that campaign. So I think that people have made up their mind on this issue. I don't think people see it as defining me. They may have whatever view they have on it. I'm proud of what I have been involved in.
Well, that's. Can I just go back on something? If you take the apology that you gave about the murder of Gerry McCabe, And so much has been written about it since then. And there was a kind of I think Miriam Law described it as a sullen or a shocked silence. And we've had many politicians of other parties, Micheál Martin was one, various other things, regarding what you did as a cynical exploitation of the murder of Adrian Donoghue to cover ground on that apology.
Well, first of all, that wasn't the first time I apologised for the killing of Gerry McCabe. I did so on at least two occasions.
On whose behalf?
On my own behalf, on behalf of Sinn Féin, and increasingly on behalf of Republicans, because Gerry McCabe was killed and other members of An Garda Síochána and of the Defence Forces.
Define Republicans then.
That general plethora of activists who are either in the Sinn Féin party, in the IRA in its time, and all of those sort of sneaking regarders who would have even emotionally have supported the IRA.
Can I just explain my difficulty with this? Because I was going back over the record.
But I do have to be able to explain myself.
Absolutely, yeah. When Gerry McCabe was murdered, it was denied by the IRA, it was denied by Sinn Féin. I remember well, I was on Live Line at the time, absolutely denied, nothing to do with us. Well, now that was a lie. And then there was a kind of a shift around and said, well, you know, they might have had something to do with things and they were operating outside of orders. The Gardaí were very clear that it was the IRA that had done it. Then time evolves and suddenly Sinn Féin has shifted its position and is campaigning to get them an early release, and indeed goes down to greet them when they do get an early release. Now that was a lie, followed by a lie, followed by an adaptation of a lie, followed by the truth.
Well, I do want to deal with the apology, but I'll deal with this question very directly. You're right, the IRA did deny that it was involved, and I presume that statement was made in good faith because the IRA leadership would have been the people who would have made that statement. Sinn Féin didn't deny anything. Sinn Féin took our cue, because I was there, from the IRA statement. We believed what the IRA leadership had said at that time. It then transpired that, yes, IRA volunteers had been involved, and that changed the entire context. On the issue of Sinn Féin campaigning for early release, I was involved in negotiations with our leadership on the Good Friday Agreement negotiations, including on the issue of prisoners. And the people who had been charged with the killing of Gerry McCabe either hadn't been sentenced or the trial hadn't concluded. They were in a limbo state. But they did fit into the category of prisoners under the Good Friday Agreement because they had been claimed by one of the organisations that would benefit from early release.
But when you were talking last week, you were talking about capital murder. This is following the tragic recent death, and you talked about 40 years minimum. How do you think Anne McCabe felt listening to that 40 years minimum?
Well, let me go back then to the business of the apology. I don't have any issue. You know, I get blamed on many things that I'm not involved or wasn't involved in. But I do accept as a Republican leader that I have a responsibility as a leader for many things, even obliquely. And I don't shy away from that. So if any family of anyone who was injured or bereaved by the IRA wants to take issue with me, I'm totally and absolutely satisfied, if that's the right word. That's the very, very least that Republicans have to put up with because of the suffering that these families had inflicted on them.